Hello, welcome to Thriving Together, a parenting podcast for those with chronic illness. This is your podcast host, Holly, and
Jenna.
hello. So, we're going to get started with our favorite question of thriving or surviving. So, Jenna, it's been a little bit because we're in the summer months and summer schedules are insane. But how are you doing right now? Are we thriving or surviving?
I am surviving. I am just barely making it. No, the weather has been really crazy here. It was like 100 degrees and then torrential downpours. So, yeah, we went through what was really hot and really dry, and now it's like super rainy and thunderstorms.
Do
So,
you guys get
definitely,
like the humidity too?
yeah. Oh, so bad.
Yeah.
So it's humid out, and then my joints hurt, and
Hmm.
I'm not feeling it, and I'm due for an infusion here soon. So, uh,
Yes. This was
can't
like
wait.
literally the perfect storm.
Yes, pretty much. So, um, yeah,
And,
that's where that's going. How about you? How are you doing? Thriving or surviving?
but I originally yesterday when I was thinking about how I was going to answer that would have said surviving, but today this morning I just woke up and I was like, oh, I'm excited to like do this today, and I just was feeling actually very accomplished about my day yesterday. The entire, probably until like 1 p.m., I was like very non-functional. I did not feel good. We took lots of naps on the couch. And then in the afternoon, I had scheduled a play date, and we actually had our first play date at our new house. And it went
Yay.
so good. So I think actually today I'm going to say thriving. I'm like a little bit on that buzz after just having a good time. It's really hard, obviously, as we know, like to meet good mom friends and also to
Yes.
get not only like a mom that you vibe with, but then kids that your kid can play well with. We are in like a weird zone with our groups of friends where like my friends, there's like a bit of an age gap between me and my husband. So his friends have kids who are like in middle school and we have a toddler. And then my
Yeah.
friends are like just getting married. So
Oh, yeah.
we
I'm right
have
there.
this like gap. And so finding friends where like the toddler can play with or like friends that have a little bit younger kids, it's been kind of tricky. So this was like incredible.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's so hard to find mom friends that your kids also get along with.
Yes,
So,
I did not realize how hard that was going to be.
I did.
We'll see if like school helps, but I don't know.
You'll have to let me know. You'll have to let me know on that.
I
But
will.
Holly, we're talking about your story today. Are you excited? Are you a little nervous?
I am excited and nervous. I have shared my story just like with the foundation or like with different fundraising things so many times. But today I wanted to just tell a little bit of like a different side of it too. So I have not rehearsed this. So we will see how it goes.
Perfect. Just let it all flow out.
Yeah, we
So,
might end up oversharing. Who knows?
it's all right. Do you want to start with getting diagnosed? Is that a good place for you
Yeah,
to start?
absolutely. So I was diagnosed a little bit later. I know when we had talked about your story, like you were fairly young. I was diagnosed officially about age 7, kind of like between 6 and 7. Um, and the process of me getting diagnosed really kind of started with my parents. And then as I started the school system, really noticing, hey, this kid just has a bit of a funny walk. She seems to have like an irregular gait. So as I'm walking, that's not really even as you're like, one foot goes forward and then it would be like one foot goes forward and then this foot catches up to this foot and this foot goes forward. So I really had that like irregular gait. And at first, maybe they thought maybe this was like a flat-footed problem. So we started out with my like local like primary doc who I kind of remember this appointment, and he was just like, "No, you guys need a specialist. This is not flat-footed. This isn't something she's going to grow out of." And he had really kind of pushed us to go see an orthopedic. So this appointment, we lived in a very rural area, so we had to drive about an hour, which honestly is not bad because I know many people have had to drive much longer than that, but we didn't go to this bigger city uh, often at all, and my dad never attended doctor's appointments. We grew up on a dairy farm, and my dad just he was always doing the chores. That's kind of his role. And he attended this appointment. So right away, I knew like there's something really wrong. Like he doesn't come to things, he doesn't
Yeah.
leave the farm. This is a big deal. And there was just kind of that air as we kind of went out to this appointment. We got some blood work done when we saw the orthopedic. I now kind of can clock this of like typical orthopedic energy, super straightforward and blunt, and just looked at us and was like, "You don't need me, you need a rheumatologist. She clearly has arthritis." That was just it.
So tell me, what was that like when they said that to you? Like, what was that car ride home? Because I
I,
know that can be a
yeah,
difficult
it
conversation.
was just like he was so like technical and brief with it. And I remember being handed, my parents were handed all of these pamphlets. And then we were very quiet walking out of the clinic. And I remembered asking my mom, like, what does that mean? And she said, well, you have arthritis, and that's a disease. And that was, I'm sure she maybe said more, but that was the piece where like my brain stopped listening. And I was like, well, you're wrong because disease is something where like you can see it. And it's something I think my mind really was thinking of like leprosy. I think that was the only disease I knew, and I was like, "You're like casted out, like you have these like deformities happening," and I was like, "That has to be wrong." And if you have a disease, you're sick, and I'm not sick because I have to go to school yet. So I had this
Yeah,
like thought where I was like, "You're wrong. Like this isn't true."
right. So you go from orthopedics, you guys end up in a rheumatologist then?
We do, yeah. So we go to rheumatology, still kind of in the same area. Um, a few appointments. We kind of start out doing naproxen pill form, and I remember like them really trying to convince me that the pill was going to be so much better than the liquid, and like we can do the liquid, but really, I think you should just do the pills. You're going to have to learn to do this at some point, anyways. And that is like a piece where I like realized right away where there is like this burden that I started to feel that I was this burden to these doctors and that I should be the good patient. Be the good patient, take the pill. You don't want to, but do it anyways. Don't disappoint your parents by making a big deal. So I would have to learn to really like shove down this internal feeling of I don't want to do this because the medication and the treatment plans were so uncomfortable to me and like would cause some like pretty big side effects, but it was expected that I just do it. So I would put the pill in my Captain Crunch cereal and I would just try to trick myself to take it. Or eventually, when we started the biologics, I started out with methotrexate, and I remember times where I would hide under my bed and I would just beg, like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do this. And I would have to come crying out to the kitchen table and do the shot. And I remember times where I had the needle in my stomach and I was crying so hard that my stomach like would contract in and the needle came out. And I thought, oh my God, I have to just do this again. And I did. I had to just restick and I had to stop crying because this is what you had to do. Methotrexate for me actually ended up, not only did I have those kind of like gross hangovers, but I would throw up like clockwork every time afterwards. Um, so it would be shot Sunday night, and I don't know why we never like changed the day, but it would be shot Sunday night, and then Monday morning I would throw up. I was lucky if it waited until I got to school, and sometimes I was that
Because then you
kid
got
that
sent home.
no, they wouldn't let me go home anymore.
Yeah, I would have absolutely used that to my power. But what a hard thing. And you were 7 when the naproxen started, right?
Yeah, and I was about 8, 9 when I was doing methotrexate.
Yeah, I mean at that age, like to feel that kind of burden and having to shove that down and suppress it. I mean, that had to be so difficult.
Yeah, it was. I think that's something that I realized I was really doing. And it's something that, like, maybe now as I have become a parent and just have kind of grown, where I look back and I'm like, I didn't label what was happening in those moments at all, or having a person where I could say, like, this really sucks. Like, I don't want to do this. There was a lot of the type of doctor that I had at the time used a lot of scare tactics.
Oh,
And so it would be a lot of conversations of, if you don't do this, and I remember very specifically the one time she said, if you don't start taking your medication, because I wouldn't, I would skip it because there were days where I felt okay. And so I didn't want to take the medications. I wanted to skip taking the shots because I was throwing up on the bus, which is so embarrassing. I was
mhm.
throwing up at school. If I didn't take a certain set of stairs, I wouldn't make it to the bathroom in time. And then I would throw up in the hallway, which is so embarrassing. And then they would say, go back to math class, you're not really sick. And so I would avoid these things, but I had a doctor who came in and said, if you don't start taking your medication, you are going to be an invalid and be in a wheelchair. And she walked out and sent in a nurse with a wheelchair who said, well, I hear that you don't want to take your medication, so you need this wheelchair. I think
I'm
I was
so
10.
sorry. That's unethical. I mean, that's just.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Uh, what did what did that do to you in that moment? Like when you heard that and you walked out, how
Yeah.
did how did you process that at that age?
Yeah. I think I was very mad. I felt so, like, for me, like being probably like 10, I felt so unheard, where I was trying to say, like, this, I'm suffering. Like, this, yes, this disease is really affecting me, and I understand that, like, things aren't okay, but these treatments are also suffering. And so we're just adding suffering and suffering. And
Yeah.
as a kid, you can only do so much. And now I really extend that empathy to my parents too, to try to literally force your kid to do these things, right? Like, I
Right.
remember my dad being like, Holly, I can't do it. I can't give you a shot. I can't hurt you. I see that it hurts you. I can't do it. And my mom also saying, like, this makes me feel so bad. Like, I don't want to hurt you, and I'm so sorry. Like, how can I do this different? Do you think I need to do it different? And them really, like, just being human. But, like, for me, what I was hearing was, you need to, like, stop crying. You need to
Yeah.
put on the fake smile. You need to say, it's fine, it doesn't bother as much as I, like, think it does, or let's try the numbing cream, maybe that helps. It doesn't. The numbing cream only was helping for the poke, and the poke's not the bad part.
No, the
The
poke's not the
burning medication's the part that sucks.
yeah. Yeah, it is. And then it's the hangover the next day.
Yes. And I think, looking back, one, you, like, when we were diagnosed, there wasn't very accessible information, right? Like, my
Yeah.
parents got a lame book, and they got pamphlets, and then they got horror stories of the generations that were above us, of
Yeah.
what arthritis is going to look like. Your kid's going to be in a wheelchair. They're not
Mhm.
going to be able to have friends. They're going to spend months in a hospital. And so they had so much of this fear of, like, what are they doing to help me, that they were just trying their best, but our medical system wasn't good about actually giving them information. When I had to
Yeah.
get my first TB test, we had just a local nurse who actually my mom knew, who explained to us actually for the first time ever what a subcutaneous shot was and why we would get the bubble and why it burns so much. And I remember my mom's face just kind of melting, where she was like, this wasn't me doing this wrong. It was burning and bubbling because that's what it does. And I could see that like she needed that information, and I did too, where I thought I like this was a sign of I need to tell them that this is happening. But again, the medical system was saying you need to just shove that down and
Yeah.
keep doing this. But they didn't take the time to say that is going to happen. You're right to feel that. You're right, it does burn. You're right. These are some things that we can do. Let's go a little bit slower with injections so that it's not bubbling. You don't have to push all of it all at once. Take your time. But they didn't take that moment. They were really focused on, let's get this kid adhering to this medication treatment.
Yeah. It's also so frustrating when you hear these types of stories because you know that it hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
The medical system hasn't changed in that sense. And on
Yeah.
top of it, they also threw on your file that you're non-compliant. So now you're fighting that battle too.
Yes.
And that's so
Yes.
hard to do because you can never expect a child to be compliant on their medication when their medication makes them feel bad. Like you
Yeah.
cannot make a child understand that there could be repercussions if you don't take your medication. Like
Yes.
that's too much for a child to have to process.
Yes.
Now,
Absolutely.
I want to go back a little bit to when you were talking about at school,
Mm-hmm.
staying at school and how embarrassing that was. If you're open to it, do you want to dive into that
Yeah.
dynamic at school and how that impacted friendships and your
Yeah.
school years?
Absolutely. So when I think about my arthritis, I know that we often label arthritis as an invisible disease, but for me, it's always been pretty visible. It actually was really difficult for me to watch old home videos because essentially my walking when I was around that, like, 6 to, honestly, it probably like stayed until I was 16. What would happen is, especially in the morning, my family had a really loving nickname for me of grandma because they
Oh, yeah, I
said
remember that.
that I looked like a 90-year-old woman. And honestly, I felt 90. My grandma right now is 94, and she still boasts that she has all her original joints. And she says, how about you, Holly?
Oh,
So I think actually I was maybe walking worse than a 90-year-old, but essentially my knees would just lock up. It was kind of like, if you can imagine like a wishbone and just like walking it. That's how I walked in the morning. My legs were almost as if they were like fused together, and I was just tilting to walk. And there's this one home video where it was Christmas morning, so I'm like walking down the hallway with my little sister, and you can tell that I'm very stiff. And then I try to get down on the floor, and watching me get down on the floor is just so painful. I could not bend my knees to like get down onto the floor. So what I would do is essentially like a downward dog, and then my hands, my wrists don't extend. That is my wrist going back. So I would use my fingertips to then crawl so that my knees could then touch, and then I would walk on top of my knuckles, like crawling. That's how I crawled. And you could just see, one, how adapted I was of like that is just how you move and that's how you do life.
mhm.
But then as a parent really seeing that of like that's not normal. There's something really wrong, and now kind of having the perspective too of, I can tell like, okay, there was really significant progression of disease. So when I did get diagnosed, it was not a shocking piece, I think, to the school to hear like there is something that is wrong. I went to a Catholic school, so a private school, and I had about 12, I think, kids in my class. And honestly, the kids, yes, that there were times where there would be some overt bullying. Um, I think that I was actually really buffered from a lot of it because it was a smaller school where they didn't say as much as maybe that they would have to me, but the things that I still would hear obviously were hurtful. There would be people that would say, I think you're faking it. You were fine yesterday. How could you do a whole field trip and then like not be able to do gym class today? You just don't want to do this. I'd have, as I got older, I would hear about at like volleyball practice that girls would walk around dragging one of their legs and saying that they were Holly and being expected to just kind of, again, just like shove it down. And a piece that I actually kind of more recently realized is the kind of overt, it's not bullying. I'm going to maybe label it more as this like microaggression from the adults that were around me. A piece that I really remember is there was some kind of open house, and it was right either before or after my diagnosis. And there was a chart on the wall of all of our different heights. And I remember a group of parents being crowded around it and just saying, "Oh, I feel so sorry. Look at that. That's just so sad. I wonder if they'll find out what's wrong with her." Because everybody else is kind of in a little clump, and then you have the kids that are really tall, and then you have Holly, who is on the bottom. And I know I've mentioned it in other podcasts, but my height has always been one of the dead giveaways that there's maybe something going on. So I currently am like, I think the tallest I've ever like maybe put on a driver's license, which maybe isn't super true, was 4'11". And I'm definitely under that. Oh yeah. I'm not gonna say exactly what it is, but it's under 4'11". It's under 4'10", and I've always been very like short, and it is curious to me how individuals will really override any empathy to gain questions for their like curiosity. They want to understand like what is wrong with you. So I remember when this group turned around and saw me standing there, this group of parents just said, "Oh, Holly, it's so good to see you. Yeah, we were just thinking about you." And this like Midwest of just shove this down. Uh,
Yeah.
they are allowed to make these remarks. And I think that that's why I didn't really stand up to any of the bullying as well, too, is because I think that there was honestly a part of me that said, well, they're right. They do walk that way. They are right. Like, there is something wrong with me. I would get these questions with just like going on a field trip, and random people would say, "You look like you're limping. What's wrong?" And I would lie and say, "Oh, I got hurt in cheerleading practice." I don't think I was fooling anybody that this kid is clearly not a cheerleader.
Well, what else are you gonna do? Like, that's just such an unfair question to ask. Again, a child. Like, I feel like I
Yeah,
make this emphasis a lot, but I want our our listeners to understand we
yeah,
were children. This was happening as we were children. Like,
yeah,
to answer those questions or people to call out, you know, what's wrong. Like, you don't want to
yeah,
explain or have to say something. So you get to give that whatever story you want to make up.
yeah. Because I think at some point I realized that actually the truth made them so uncomfortable
Oh yeah.
that people were asking these questions to me, but they were not capable of really understanding the answer. So when I would say, like, I have arthritis, I would get these responses of just pity and
Yeah.
uncomfortableness where they didn't know what else to say. So I really was able to clock in on that of, okay, it's my job then to soothe their feeling of like, I make them uncomfortable. So I would make the joke where I would say, well, I'm doing okay, and like the medications are working, and we're hopeful that things are going to be okay, where I didn't really believe any of those things. but
Yeah.
I felt that I had to somehow like make this easier for these individuals who ask these questions. As I got older, I got really quick with these responses where, elevators are my like just bane of existence because
Yeah.
people somehow think that they can ask those questions. So they would say, well, why are you just so short? And I would just like rattle off these responses of, well, my mom told me that things only grow until they're perfect, and I guess it just doesn't take us as long as some people. And I would make
I hope
these
you speak to
little,
the really tall people.
yes, I would, yes. And I would be like, what does that say about you?
What does it say about you that you're asking this question?
Yeah. And I just like, I knew that I had to make these little jokes because saying, like, oh, well, I actually have juvenile idiopathic arthritis and that's why I'm short. That's not the answer that they wanted. And they don't know what to do with that. And I remember one time I was getting gas as like a teenager and I went into the gas station to pay it and he said, well, stand up. Oh, wait, you are. And I couldn't do it. And I said, that was really rude. I have juvenile idiopathic arthritis and that's why I'm short. And this guy just like apologized and I was like, I mean, that didn't really make me feel better.
No,
But
no.
I couldn't just make the joke every time. I can't
No,
always shove these things down.
no, and you shouldn't be expected to. I also feel like, just because we have an autoimmune disease or invisible but not really invisible disease, people that doesn't give people the free pass to say what they want just because they're curious. Now I find it a little different, and just, I'll let you speak to this too, but I don't mind when kids ask because they're truly
Mm-hmm.
just curious, where I feel like an adult's intent is much different than a child's intent.
I feel when a child asks me now, I'm able to really approach it from a different lens. I'm able
Mhm.
to say things like, you are right to notice I am short. My body is a little bit different. My bones have grown a little bit different. And that's why sometimes I walk a little bit different, but I'm still, whatever role I am to them, or like, but I'm still grown up. I sometimes say that because I do get that question from kids. Are you a kid or are you a grown up? And these are questions of they're trying to understand that this is a person with a different ability in front of them. And I'm willing to be in that space with them. I am much less willing to do that with adults because I think that we could do better. Or, sometimes I'll have kids make those comments. Their adults will say, that's not kind. Don't say that. Don't say that. And I will say, like, it's okay for them to be curious. Like, they are trying to understand. And, like, I'm willing to, like, give them appropriate answers. Um, when I think about kids, and it's funny, like, kids, like, asking me, I don't often feel like they are coming from a malicious intent. Even when sometimes where I have kids be like, are you a midget? Like, I don't think that they are coming from a malicious place. But when I get an adult saying those things to me, I do. I'm just kind of like, why do you think that you have the privilege to whatever history I have? Like,
Right,
you don't get my medical history. Like, you're not owed that because you have curiosity.
right,
But when I think about the peer to peer situations from my past too, I do find it really curious that there is more like maliciousness there, like whether it was some of those examples that I shared in the past or when I started high school, I actually decided, so after we had that not so great encounter with that rheumatologist, shockingly, we decided this doesn't seem like a good fit. So we switched. And during that kind of switch, I met with a rheumatologist, and we didn't actually have access to any more pediatric
mhm,
rheumatologists around me. So I made the switch much earlier than maybe some others would, but I switched to an adult rheumatologist, and she asked for x-rays right away. And then almost in one of our first sessions, she said, well, of course you're not really getting better. Your bones, your joints have a lot of damage to them. And yes, medications are helpful for the active disease that's happening, but they're not going to address past damage. That's already done. And honestly, now, when I tie in those pieces of that home video, that damage was done before I even started seeing the first rheumatologist. I've never been able to bend my wrist. I've never been able to get up and down off the ground. That damage had been happening for such a long time that, of course, these medications and the results that she was expecting wasn't going to happen because of the damage. So we started looking into actually joint replacements. They said this is not something that really is going to get better. This is really the option that we're looking at. And it was kind of put on my table of, when you're ready, let us know. And it took a couple of years. And when I started high school, it was the first time where I had to switch schools. So my private school was kindergarten through 8th grade. And so, yes, I had those moments, but there was also acceptance because that's just Holly. And then when I started high school, it was horrible. I had to walk through a hallway, as you do in high school, right? You have to switch
Right.
classes. And I felt like an animal in the zoo. I would have people just behind me saying, oh my God, who is this girl? What's wrong with her? Why is she walking like that? As if I couldn't hear them as they're directly behind me. They would make the comments like, oh, there's that midget freshman. And my sister at the time was a senior, and she was in an English class, and she was just like talking, or the class was talking, and one of the other senior boys said, oh my God, guys, have you seen that midget freshman? Like, what is wrong with her? And then there was some silence, and my sister said, that's my little sister. She has arthritis. And so it was this moment of like, what are people saying when I'm not in the room? Like, if they're saying those
Right.
things to me literally behind my back, and then these moments where my sister was hearing these things too, and she shared that piece with me, and then again I would just like shove it down of like, well, what are we going to do about that? There's nothing we can do. There was no like piece of like how to handle that sort of bullying within the school, because the school's message to me kind of was like, well, it is true. Like, you do have arthritis. Like, you do walk different. There were moments where like I don't think that they understood what to do with someone who like had a disability but still was like functional. They tried to at one point like funnel me through like special education because I said I can't do gym anymore, and we had to like fight with the school district of like, we just can't do gym. Like,
Yeah. The gym
they,
battle was rough.
yeah. And I remember this psychiatrist that they brought in, we met in a room, and they had a scooter just like happened to be in the room. It did not, it wasn't something that I like clocked or registered. And she said, well, so is that how you get around the school?
No. You know, I feel like a psychiatrist should have known better. Personally, that's just my like maybe like we don't say that.
And there was this moment where, and I was maybe 15. So we had decided that I would be getting a hip replacement in the next year. And I just was like, this school, these adults are supposed to be the adults that like would be protecting me. And they are the ones that are hurting me too. Like, how can I go to them and say that like I'm going through this bullying situation, or like, how can I think there was honestly a part of me that was like, how can I trust these adults to understand what I'm going through when they show over and over again that they don't understand. So it
Right.
was another piece of like, cry and then just move forward because there was no solution. There was a part of me that I think really, when I was wanting the hip replacements where I just wanted to change myself. I wanted it to be something that was going to help me like blend in. I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to be invisible and I wanted to just be left alone. So at age 16, we decided to do my first hip replacement, which was very helpful. Like, again, orthopedics are really amazing doctors and maybe very blunt and concise. And he looked at the x-ray and said, holy shit, I don't know how you're walking. That person I just saw is like crying to me and they don't have half the damage that you have. Like, we should do this right now. And I was like, we need to wait until summer because there is no way in hell that I will go to
No,
school
oh no.
with a walker or cane. Like, I
That
was
would
already getting the bullying. There is no way in hell.
there that would kill any shred of anything you had if you did. And
Yeah.
what like at that age too, I mean, 16 years old, you're going through those teenage years, you already feel a certain way about yourself, and then on top of it, now you just want to find a way to blend in. Like, what was that like for you to have to kind of work through? I mean, did you find this as a like yes, this is it, this is going to fix everything? And was it
Yeah.
were
I
you
think
really like were you scared? Did you think that this could make things a lot worse too?
I think I was in a place where I wanted it to fix everything and I wasn't really prepared for how hard it was going to be because of that. I am really thankful that like my immediate family is so like my sisters and my parents. And I actually am going to throw my like maternal grandma in there because she was actually so helpful during my like recovery. But they were very supportive. And I think my parents knew like, yes, this is something that we have to do. And like clearly seeing your child go through all of that pain, I
Yeah,
imagine that they had some of that same hope of wanting things to work. And as a parent now, like what they were going through, I'm sure was, elements where like I didn't even think about like the cost of the surgery. And
right.
that's a huge expense.
Huge expense.
And they were willing to just like, we'll figure it out. Like, we have to do this. Like, we're going to figure this out. Or the recovery process and the doctor's appointments and all of that. And they were so supportive because I think that they knew that I was kind of at a breaking point where the bullying and every day, like dreading just being in public, where I felt like a spectacle wherever I went. Any new place made me anxious because I wasn't sure, could I sit? Because if I'm sitting, people don't really notice me. But anytime I have to walk in front of them, I'm going to get a comment. And
Yeah.
so I think that whether they maybe could verbalize that now or not, like I think that they knew I had to do this.
Yeah.
So when I did it, I had to finish my finals at school early. And I remember one teacher just being like, no one talked about it. Like, I was about to have this major surgery, and like, no teacher addressed it with me. I had one teacher very awkwardly, because I had a friend that kind of like stopped me while I was by this teacher that was like, oh my gosh, Holly, like, I'm so nervous for you, like, as you do this next week, or like that week. I think honestly it was like 2 days before. And they were like, I'm so nervous for you, like, text me. And the teacher just was like, what are you doing? I was
Yeah,
like,
because they're
oh,
like a hip replacement. You're 16. Like,
yeah. And just like not being clocked into that, whereas like you don't know your student is about to have a hip replacement and just awkwardly was like, well, I'll pray for you.
like
I get a lot of that.
it's it's major surgery. It is not an easy recovery,
Yes.
and to do that at 16 is,
You know,
I imagine, very challenging.
16 was a weird age to do it because you are still a kid. You legally cannot make those choices. that I didn't know I was going to have to be making.
Right.
So I watched the little video and it talked about like what to recover, how to recover afterwards. It was like this little animated video that the hospital gave you, and it was just like filled with old people. It's traumatic to get a handout of how to have safe sex, and it was just like a whole bunch of old people. It's like, no!
No. And you know
16
they
year
gave you
old.
that pamphlet with your parents. Like, that it
It
wasn't
was
like they like
just,
discreetly handed it to you. That was given to you and your parents.
it was, yeah, just in this, no one thought, hey, this patient is 16. We should maybe look at what material we're giving her and
Right.
maybe make some adjustments so that one, like, yes, like, it would, sure, that information is great to know, like baseline, but
Yeah.
it was just in the way that they gave it to me, which is so funny. I definitely had a great time embarrassing my parents. I'm like, look what I have.
That's great. I love it.
So when we got to the hospital, you have to do like the registration,
Yeah.
and I just like I wish that there was a way, and like now I know like there is actually a way on like hospital charts to put a big flag so everybody sees why you are here. But in our registration, as I'm there with my dumb walker, which okay wasn't dumb, my older sister knew that I was having a really hard time with like the idea of having to use a walker, so she like decorated it really beautifully, but it also caused a lot of attention.
Oh, yeah, it did.
So I had my walker, and we're like walking up, and we're like, hey, we're checking in for surgery. We're having a hip replacement. And the registration lady goes, oh, were you like in a car accident?
It's just like, can't you just check me in? And not to sound rude, this is gonna
Yes.
sound rude, but can you just do it silently? Like,
Yes.
must you try to make small talk over this?
Yes. Right? So it's like 5 a.m. We have been up since like 3 a.m. because you had to like do a special shower prep in the morning.
Yeah.
We had to drive there. We had to park there. We're doing all of this. My parents are clearly nervous. I am nervous and like nauseous. And then it was just this moment where I was like, oh yeah, this shit is still happening. And we go through the process. We're doing all of our like check in stuff. And they get ready for anesthesia. And they say, okay, we'll say goodbye to mom and dad. And my mom goes, whoa, she's 16. What do you mean you're taking her without a parent present? And they were like, that's our protocol. And she had to really push it. Like, she is 16. This is
Yes.
a child. You are not doing medical things on her without me being present until she is going into the OR. And I'm so thankful that she did, because they did not prepare me for this. Or maybe they did, and again, 16, I didn't clock this. But anesthesia, they came in, they did the IV, which I'm glad my mom was there, and they're starting to add this like medication that is making me feel like a little
Oversleep.
buzzy. And the anesthesiologist comes in and says, hey, so we're going to do this today. We typically just do our local anesthesia, which means nerve blocker in your hips, epidural. You're going to be awake, but not really awake. You won't remember anything. That's usually what we do. Or I guess we could do general anesthesia, but we don't really recommend that where you're really out. And I was like, excuse me?
Knock me out.
Are you proposing to a 16-year-old to volunteer to be awake for this surgery?
That's nuts. That is nuts.
As they are like loading me up with drugs. And I look at my mom and she says, Holly, you need to make this choice.
No. You're like, I'm 16. I can't even drive yet. Like, this is crazy.
I think my brain said, are you kidding me? Now I get to make choices, but before I didn't get to make these choices. And I mean, I do respect that she allowed me to make
Yeah.
that choice. But again, there was that feeling of like, be the good patient. This anesthesiologist is telling you that they don't do general anesthesia on patients that you're supposed to do the scary awake surgery. That's what you're supposed to do. So
I
I
can't
did.
believe it. I cannot believe they did that to you. Did you remember any of it though?
No,
Okay.
it is, I mean, that is the way that they do the surgery. So they do an epidural, which was so funny when I had my daughter. I was like, this is my third epidural now. And this is first birth, but third epidural because it's really the same process. They bend you over the bed. So you're like hunched over or back curled, which is really tricky when you have arthritis. And
Yeah,
they put the needle into your back and it sucks. Like,
it does.
it
It
sucks.
really does.
You can feel it. It is a really hard pressure, and you just want to move. And they are holding me down, saying, don't move, don't move, don't move. And then I can feel the medicine going to my nerves. And that was what I remember first. I don't remember the nerve blockers, which are going to be shots like right into your hips. I don't know when they did those. Um, I don't remember my first surgery. I do remember like going into the OR for my second surgery and making a comment to them because they like tried to like tie my arms out and my elbows don't bend. And I was like, my arms don't do
I
that.
listen. I can never understand to in my opinion you can't bring a kid back. I don't care if they're 17 years old. I don't care if they're 18 years old.
Yeah,
You knock them out before they're in the operating room. I was 24 years old and I
yeah,
just going into the operating room and then them literally tying you down. That is a horrible feeling. Like
yeah.
knock me out.
Well, and I don't think my mom was aware that I was going to get that question. Like, no one
No, I know.
sat with us and said, this is what this is.
Yeah,
No
it's crazy.
one. And then recovery was another like bunch of unknowns where I woke up and I was really struck by like I physically don't feel my hip joint anymore. Before I could like feel constantly this radiating pain from my hip joint, and when it was gone, like it was just no pain, which was incredible.
That's
I
awesome.
wasn't prepared for like how weak I was going to be when you cut through that many layers of muscles. Like, they just don't work. So I had to relearn how to walk. I had to relearn, like, being able to get support to go to the bathroom. For a while, they were really pushing a lot of, like, the pain management meds, and it would make me throw up every time. So I'm throwing up. I'm, like, then jolting, moving my hip, which was very painful. And it happened to me actually both times. So my first hip replacement and my second hip replacement, where I got my period in the hospital bed. So being 16, I have a catheter. And
Oh
I am
no.
getting my catheter out and finally getting to go to the bathroom. I go to the bathroom and I'm like, are you kidding me? I
That
got
would have
my
been the
period.
breakdown moment. That would have been the breakdown moment. I don't know if I can do this.
Which was actually really tricky because your scar goes along the line of your underwear. So it was, okay, one, I don't even know if I brought underwear, to be honest. I'm sure I did, but like that wasn't something that I could wear at that point because you had
Yeah.
so much of the bandage on and they were going to have to be checking it. So I'm getting like those cute postpartum underwear. These giant fucking hospital grade pads. I'm
Beautiful.
16. My mom had to like strongly advocate of like they were going to drop me off in the pediatrics ward post recovery, and my mom was like, no, you're not. She needs to stay with the orthopedics because this is an orthopedic surgery. I've already witnessed individuals not knowing how to handle this situation. I want to stay with the nurses that know how to handle this situation. So we stayed there, but we had to fight for them to like bring me a pediatric gown because my gown was like just all the way open, wouldn't cover my body because it's so big, all the way on the ground. So I'm just like naked. having my period, just like 16, where you're craving privacy.
Yeah.
Not great.
Not great.
And just was really hard. But I remember, as shitty as I felt, every time the nurse walked in, thank you. No, I'm okay. I don't need anything. Thank you. Thank you. And I don't remember if it was my first or my second, but I remember just like laying there silently and crying. And finally, one nurse said, "Honey, are you okay?" And I just cried and I said, "This is just a lot. Like, it's just a lot."
Yeah.
But there was no one. I mean, my mom was there and she was always like trying her best. But I think that because I was so good at masking that everything's okay, that I didn't really allow people to know, like, this is scary. Like, this
Yeah.
is way more than I thought it was going to be. And now I have an 8-week recovery ahead of me.
That's so much to deal with at that age. I mean, it's so much to deal with at any age, but especially at that age where you really can't even make your own
Yeah.
decisions. Like, legally,
No,
you're
yeah.
supposed to make them, and here you are having to go
Yeah.
through recovery. Your whole summer is gone because your whole summer is spent on recovery.
Yeah. No friends came. I had one friend that visited one time when I was 18 and had my second hip replacement. I had no friends that came and visited me, and I lost a lot of friends because I couldn't do the things. I just stopped getting invited to things, and it just made, I think, them uncomfortable to like
Yeah.
go visit your friend who had a hip replacement. Like, at 18, like, what do you do with that? So they just had the privilege to ignore it.
Yeah. I think especially I mean, we're relatively around the same age, we're I, I think people don't know how to act around us when you have these certain situations, these medical, and they just feel uncomfortable, so they don't show.
Yeah.
And it hurts so bad
Yeah.
to think the people that you thought would be there for you during this time
Yeah.
aren't there. Like it, I I feel for you on that. I'm so sorry that you didn't have somebody there.
I think that there was so much of my internal shame that I was like, well, I don't blame them. Like, looking back at both those recoveries, I think that there were certain elements of like some adjustment, like disorder of like depression going on. Of that
Yeah,
makes
sure.
sense, right?
That makes sense.
But
Maybe I should
I,
have thought of that ahead of time.
yes, but I don't think that I had access to being able to label what that was
Yeah,
internally, where I just was like, you're supposed to just be the good patient, do your exercises, go do these things. And my poor parents, they were the ones that would then get my anger because it was the only safe place to go. But I would just yell at them. I would just
right.
be so mad of like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to watch another movie. I want to get out of this room. Like, I want to get out of this house, or they would take me out. And then I would be so resentful. Like, you made people see me with my walker. You made people see me with my, like, cane. But I just was going through a really hard time where, like, there was nothing that anyone really could do. It was just going to be a really hard time.
Right. Did you now you recovered from your first one and now we're back in high school.
Yes.
How did that go?
It did what I thought it was going to do. Like, it helped. I think there was less bullying. And then I knew that I wanted to do my other hip replacement. Not only one, because I knew I wasn't going to have time as I became older to take off like 6-12 weeks.
Right.
But I knew I didn't want to start college with any of this baggage. So I had my second hip replacement. I graduated high school. I had my party. And then I think like 3 days later, I had my second hip replacement. And then that was my summer recovery again. And then I started college, and I picked my college because it was a smaller campus and it was refreshing to not get so many comments about physically, like how I was moving, but I still got the comments about the height. And that happened. I think I was known for the first like week of college because it was a small campus, but eventually it kind of got a little bit better. I kind of noticed that kind of wherever I am at, there's usually a first week of adjustment where I get a lot of those comments, and then it kind of goes away. But college was overall pretty good. I was able to actually find some friends that were much were able to like have that capacity to understand what I was going through and were really supportive as they could, whether it was helping me do shots in the dorms or when I had ulnar nerve relocation surgery, sending me gift packages. Like I had friends that were actually showing up, and that was so healing. And
Yeah.
being able to just kind of continue into my adulthood, really focusing on I choose people who understand me, and I choose people who will have that compassion and that effort to show up. And that has been honestly really healing to have those people around me. My husband is definitely one of those people. I don't think he has ever questioned any bit of my arthritis. Like, even right away as we started dating, I remembered my first flare I had at his house. And I just was like, yeah, like sometimes heat helps. Like, do you have a heat pack? And he's like, no, but I have a sock. I was like, what? And he just filled a sock up with rice and he's like, here you go. And I was like, is this clean? Like,
You definitely have to question that. Like, no, you definitely have to question that.
this is so sweet. And also, I hope that this was clean. Um, but I am really grateful for that. And I think that there are certainly moments where, like, I still have moments where people make those comments, and I try to really tap into, like, where I am right now in life and remind myself, like, I have worth that is just, like, innate in me. It does not come from, like, my physical ability or whatever height I am, and other people's discomfort, like that's their own. And like I don't always have to be the one that fixes or smooths those things over. I'm still definitely healing when it comes to like the medical field where I still often am the good patient, and I'm really trying to work hard of like being inconvenient to them. Like sometimes I'm gonna be inconvenient to them, and I'm really trying to work on that piece. But I think in my personal life that has gotten a bit better.
I hope that one day we are able to feel that way in the medical field, but like chronic illness patients make the best patients. They're the
Yeah.
kindest for a reason because we all feel bad. Which so sorry to bother you.
Oh my
But
gosh, yeah. Even when I had my daughter, my husband was like, "You think every nurse, like it's like 3 a.m. and they have just came in 45 minutes ago," and I'm like, thank you so much."
like thank you as you're like actively crying. Thank you.
Yes,
It's
like
in one of
you
those
just
moments.
woke up my kid to take her like temperature. It's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you do.
Nurses are the unsung heroes, though. I
They
mean,
are absolutely amazing. And I'm like, I am really trying to work on being able to be like assertive, like in a healthy way, like not in a
oh
passive way of just like agreeing with what is convenient for them, but actually like saying, like, I'm not going to do that. That's not helpful.
yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have a few minutes here to wrap up, but any other part like of your story that you feel is just really critical to your story that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah. I think as I have like entered the stage of motherhood, something I know that we have talked a lot about is just like trying to I think it's really important for me to be like, this is my stuff from the past and like not put that on my kid. So that's something that I think I'm still working on, and being able to like have this space to talk about it, I think is really helpful and validating to be like, yeah, like that was really crummy, and that doesn't mean that that's going to continue to happen again, like in my life right now.
Yeah.
So I think that there's still those pieces that I'm like personally doing, just making sure that like I am dealing with my stuff so that that doesn't kind of come up in my parenting. And then when it does, like really meeting myself with that grace of like, I still am a really great mom and I am the right mom for my kid, and really trying to meet myself in that. And I think that I definitely am still having moments where I like grow into that, but I really do truly believe that. And I think that she's going to be a very kind and empathetic person
I think she
because
will
of
be.
some of these pieces. I like already see that where like, well, her favorite line sometimes when she doesn't want to do something is my knee hurts.
Okay,
So,
that is that's great. I love that. That's so funny. You're like, does it really though? But
do I check her knees to make sure there's no inflammation? Yeah. But
yeah,
she also
yeah,
is like 3 and doesn't want to go take her bowl to the sink.
right. And it's so interesting, like the healing portion of it because it's like we had to give my little guy medicine the other day. He obviously did not want to take it, but he needed it.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm up bribing every which way because I don't want to force this medication on him because
Yeah.
I know medications have been forced on me, and I'm like, okay, like what are we gonna do about this? And it's just like you kind of get like your heart rate picks up, you get a little anxious. You're like, oh my gosh, like I'm not 5 anymore. I'm not 5. Like I'm
Yes.
I'm okay.
Yep.
I'm safe. I'm safe,
Yes. It's
but
not
not
the same. It's
right.
not the same medication. Yeah.
No. Now, if I
Yeah.
had to give him methotrexate, this would be a different conversation. I don't think I could do that, but yeah, it's just things that we, as parents that we're now working through, just because our past and
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it was awesome hearing about your story. I don't think I've actually heard the in-depth portion, especially of I knew you had your hip replacements, but I don't think I knew all of that. So
Yeah.
it was really really nice to hear all that. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, everyone, if any part of my story resonates with you, or if you would like to maybe share some pieces of your stories in the comments, we are always here to connect with you. We love this community that we are building, and the more engagement that we get from you guys, the more that we can kind of put our energy into this project too, which I think is so helpful for a lot of individuals where you know that you're not alone in this really unique intersect between parenting and having a chronic illness. And so follow us on Instagram. We are going to be active there. We have our YouTube channel. If you find us on different podcast areas too, um, make sure that you go ahead and give us that 5-star rating so that we can see your engagement and that these stories are helpful for you. And we can't wait to come back next time with something different.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye, all.
Bye.